Welcome to the Nevcast, where three bros talk business, art, justice, and the pursuit of Jesus.
Any day above ground is a good day.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and kiss 30 minutes goodbye with Peter Nevland,
Dave Nevland,
and Rashid.
All right.
Hey, here we are. Another episode of the Nevcast with Dave Nevland, Peter Nevland, and
Rashid. And joining us,
got you back, man.
And joining us is a special guest, Pastor Papa Jim Evans.
Hello, guys.
That's right.
How are you? Hey.
There
he is.
I got a double title now, Dave. I love it.
Yeah. Now there's three of us, three of the four of us who have been to prison. And I think Peter's the only one who has not been to prison. And I've been to prison with you, Jim.
That's not true, Dave.
You've been to prison?
True. I've been to prison multiple times. Yeah, in Florida, and then also in Texas, here in Austin.
Okay,
and, it's one of my favorite places to perform.
Oh yes, that's right.
Because man, the response is so incredible. The place that was the hardest place that I ever had to perform was in Florida. It was this juvie prison, and it was just a little tiny. It didn't feel like they were giving them any kind of like space or anything like that. It was a little tiny room. You know, that one felt probably incredibly impressive. But in the Austin prison, you know, they had the prisoners come into a special room that they have set up like a church and everything like that. And that was great. England prison. I've been to prison in England as well. And that was a fantastic experience. So anyway,
we have to put you on.
But I know that you guys have been in a number of times.
Yeah. Jim's about to invite you to prison is what he's about to do.
Yeah. I was going to say, I have to add you to the list, Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm not going out trying to shout it to everybody. I guess I just did. But
don't want to do that. No. Some people don't quite get it. You know.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
We used to have a pastor. In fact, I know who he is. He has a very large church now, but a lot of times he would start his sermon by saying, "Well, are you glad you're here and not in prison?" And from the times I've been there, I'm not sure I would always answer yes.
Oh wow.
yeah, right.
That's bad, huh?
We've had some great times in prison. I mean, seeing miracles, you know, pop out and people just coming to Christ and it's just alive. So anyways, that's why I would say I'm not sure if I would say I'd rather be there than in prison. Sometimes I may rather be in prison.
I can relate to that statement. Actually, all the churches I've been in, we shouldn't talk. We should let's switch gears.
Switch gears. Okay, all right. So switching gears, Papa Jim, you've been in the Black Panthers. So we're prison to the Black Panthers. And you've been a university professor, and you've been a pastor, and now you run martial arts. That's right. Mm-hmm. Martial arts black belt expert, teacher, instructor. Sorry, what's the word for it? Starts with an S.
Well, the arts I did were Korean, so it's Kwangjunim means master instructor.
Master instructor, right?
Kwangjunim, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now you run inner healing ministry at Bethel, Austin, called the Transformation Center.
Right.
So getting people free on an individual scale, a bunch of people, on an individual scale over and over.
Yeah. That's about right. Yeah. And we have different modalities that we use. We use what we call pastoral counseling. And in addition to all the stuff you talked about, I did because I'm really old, right? So I had time to do all these things. I'm trained as a counselor, and I was a counselor for many years. So when the Holy Spirit basically picked up my whole family, you know our story, and slammed us and said, you will serve me.
Yeah.
So then I took those tools along with what Holy Spirit was teaching me and guiding me through, and became a pastoral counselor, which I've done sometimes on the side, sometimes it's primary. Right now it's primary. At Bethel Redding, it was more on the side in the mix with the other ministries that I was running there. But
yeah. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about we talk about three brothers talk about art, business, and justice in pursuit of Jesus. And this may not or may have a little bit of the art, and it probably doesn't have too much business, but I think we can talk a lot about what true justice is, especially when we talk about setting people free in their inner lives, right, that comes out and get free in their external lives as well. But I've heard your story. I've seen it impact people in prison, and then a bunch of miracles come out. But not everybody who listens to us knows your story. Oh, do you have a copy of your book right there with you, right close by? Because I went to go look for mine, and I've misplaced mine. I've read the whole thing, but I have misplaced.
I don't have one up here in the library, which is strange.
It's called From the Panthers to the Pulpit.
Right. Yep. And
from the Panthers.
I can ask my wife to bring one up real quick if you like.
Or we can edit in the post. We can put a picture of the book right here.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah.
There you go. Point.
So we always say, right. It's right here.
Yeah. So
or there.
Took me 8 years to write that, but it encompassed a lot, and really.
Oh, and there's your beautiful wife in back of you.
They can see you. You're on TV. that got out.
Oh, she brought you one. There it is.
That's it. There. Yeah.
Panthers to the Pulpit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've heard your story. Maybe let's introduce a little bit of that story. That basically how you got into the Panthers in college, and then how long you were there, and just the amazing things that happened to get you out or put you in prison and then bring you out of prison. Because that's truly a God story.
Yeah.
Is that a good question?
Well, just before, Jim, before you start in Rashi, I just want to say, as you're listening, I know this is your first time meeting Jim Evans, but anytime you have any questions or a thought or something like that, feel free to shout out at us and get our attention to ask it. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, because he's listening, he's driving, but Rashi's got some experience as well, and I'm sure would have some interesting things to ask or to say. So
sure,
excellent. Yes, yes.
Well, I just want to clarify one thing. I wasn't in prison per se. I was in county jail.
Okay, that's right.
County jails I was in was called Santa Rita Prison.
Interesting.
And it's county jails can be funny. You can be there awaiting trial, or you can actually be sentenced for up to 2 years and do your time in county instead of going to the penitentiary. So I was never in the penitentiary, though I was in a lower level prison, which a lot of guys who had done time in the penitentiary said that the county jail was harder time to do. You don't have the same. You don't have the same freedom, and you are really jammed in a lot of the hours of the day with other inmates, which can be very interesting.
Right. Well, and at that time, what years was that? That was in the 60s. That was in the late 60s?
71. Yes, early 70s.
And there were some particular problems with that county jail that then got fixed because of you.
Well,
that could be. We could get into some of that story.
Well, when I first got there, I was put in because I was sort of high profile, being my wife is giving me input from downstairs.
That's good.
I was kind of high profile, and So, and she rightly reminded me it was San Francisco County Jail, um, and the federal holding facility on the seventh floor of the Bryant Street facility. I remember it like it was yesterday. Um, we were in. Well, first I was in a cell block all by myself. I was isolated there only because I think they were just trying to make room for me somewhere else, and that was interesting. And the Marin County Courthouse shootout had just gone down, where Jonathan Jackson was killed, a Superior Court judge, so forth and so on, and a young man by the name of Ruchell McGee, who was a prisoner in San Quentin, was a part of that shootout. I won't give you all the details; it'd take me a half hour to do it. But he was on the cell block right above me, right in the cell right above me, and I never met Ruchell. He didn't know who I was, so we had no conversation. He was very leery about talking to anybody, which I could understand. And so that was it. I could hear him moving around up there. There was no one else on the cell block with me. And they didn't have any heat or air conditioning or anything because they just built it out. And it was an interesting few days. Anyway, they moved me over to the high secure wing called the D block. And I was over there with guys, for the most part, who committed serious felonies in California penitentiaries, San Quentin, Soledad, that sort of thing. They either tried to escape, they committed a murder, or whatever. And so I was put in there, and that's where I spent the majority of my time. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was this horrific stench, and I soon learned that this was a cell, it was a 6-man cell, and everybody in there was a mentally ill person, someone who had been convicted of was on trial for some crime, but they were mentally ill, and these guys were filthy. I mean, they didn't have the wherewithal to take care of themselves. It was horrific, and I noticed that. And then the food was. We got a dry bologna sandwich every day for lunch. We got some kind of gruel for breakfast. And if we were lucky, we got some kind of almost indistinguishable meat for dinner, probably 3 times a week. And they had a farm, so a lot of stuff was off their farm, but it wasn't clean. So you had to pick worms out of your vegetables, or your lettuce, and so forth and so on.
Wow.
So being a writer, I started writing these things down. I just did. That was the thing I did. And my lawyer, he found out that I was chronicalizing these things. He asked me to give them to him, which I did. And I gave them to him. And so he submitted them to a couple of Bay Area newspapers, and they got published. And man, so, I mean, it really hit the fan after that, man. My bill was tossed daily. I couldn't keep anything, and I had a cellmate named Blink who didn't care. He was like, "Yeah, do it," and it was just tossed daily because they were trying to find any writing materials, anything that I might have. Anyway, it got to be such a big stink. Oh, and this doctor, the facility doctor, I had a condition. I had a torn rotator cuff for martial arts actually that was from football in high school, and it was extreme. If you ever had a torn rotator cuff, you know how extremely painful those can be, and especially if they get infected. Yeah. And he wanted to take me to the hospital, but they forbade it because they said I was too much of an escape risk.
Wow.
So he was very upset by that. All he could give me was aspirin. And so he went to the newspaper and he allowed them to interview him, and he just took the roof off of things. Anyway, long story short, the food improved. The mentally ill people were taken to a totally different part of the facility. As far as I understand, well taken care of, cleaned, and so forth. The warden of the facility got fired, who was actually the sheriff, got fired. He was the undersheriff, got fired. And they cleaned house in terms of the guards. And they were brutal. And 3 of them were Nazis. And at night they would fix the rotation so that they were there by themselves, and they would wear their swastikas. It's certain parts of the facility, and
Gee
they
whiz.
would they would they would just brutalize inmates, brutalize them. And anyway, so
Jim,
formed the hunger strike. All the guys joined me. They came in to attack us, to make us, and then they looked at who they were facing, all these murderers. And, and I remember this one black guy said, "Man, y'all ought to pay me enough to go in there." he turned around and left, and that was the end of that. But after that, like I said, things got cleaned up. It was like being in a brand new place. It was amazing. And little did I know how much
what
God
was
was with me.
the
He was absolutely with me. They tried to kill me once in the shower, and this librarian came by and wouldn't leave, and they said, "Well, we'll kill you too." And he said, "Well, you're going to have to, because I'm not leaving him." And it was quite a several months. Yeah.
goodness? What was the original reason that you were arrested and put in this county jail?
Well, Peter, if you were a Black Panther, especially a leader in the Bay Area at that time, the Panthers were all over the world. Basically,
Right.
we had headquarters in
Right.
Moscow, Peking, London, but of course, the Bay Area was the epicenter, right? And you had a target on your
Yeah.
back. And I was arrested more times than I can remember. Just usually probably just held overnight, whatever, and released because they had nothing on me. But this time, they raided a house. I've been sought after for a year, and they caught up with me in San Francisco in a house with several other brothers, and I was charged with um, an attack against a foreign government, which is the South African embassy. They said I tried to bomb it, um, with kidnapping a state official, uh, various assault
Wow.
charges, and they never brought it down. But J. Edgar Hoover was considering having them bring treason against me, which would carry the death penalty.
Yeah.
So those are the things. So basically, I was looking at life in prison or death.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow.
Basically, in connection to protesting, what would you say? What would you say the group was protesting in general?
A myriad of things, but racism and oppression of people across the world. It wasn't just the United States thing. That's how South Africa got involved with apartheid.
Right.
We published papers. We had a newspaper that I worked on for quite a while, the Black Panther paper, which we published every day. We wrote, we spoke. I was a speaker. And that year that I was underground, that I was running from the police, they didn't know where I was or what I was doing. So they just threw everything against me that they could find. Basically,
Wow.
anything that was unsolved, it was Jim Evans.
For people listening who don't know, what is, I've heard you tell me that, the Black Panther organization, what your actual goals and what your actual activities are, were different from what the public perception was, especially when you were involved in at the beginning. Can you kind of say sort of like what your aims were and what you were really trying to bring about, and what you were actually doing? I know you were talking about writing for the paper.
Right. Well, the Black Panthers. Okay, so during that time, the media did a really good job of mixing all of us up in the public's eye. The Black Panthers, the Black Muslims, the Weather Underground, the Black Liberation Army, Stokely Carmichael with the Christian leadership. Whatever. They just mixed us all up. The Christian Leadership Council, which is someone else, and they just Malcolm X. We were all the same in terms of the media, but we weren't all the same.
Right.
Malcolm and Martin particularly was a nonviolent movement, and you guys all know he's uber famous, and we were more the enforcement branch of that. Our goals, our stated goals, was autonomy for oppressed people and for the black community. We felt like the black community was occupied and didn't have any representation, no voice. That day, you have to remember, guys, this is 2023. We're talking about 1960,
Yeah.
1965, when housing segregation was alive and well. And though it was de facto, still, you really couldn't live anywhere you wanted to. You were all crowded into certain areas, right? If you were a high level professional, you might be able to buy a house in the suburbs without getting run out of there. Maybe.
Right.
Probably not in most cases.
Right.
And so we were heavily patrolled. Heavily patrolled. Yes, there was a lot of crime.
Right.
No doubt. But people were living on top of each other trying to survive. So the whole idea was, especially in Oakland, I grew up in Washington, D.C. But when I came to Oakland, there was a real movement there to have a more humane, understanding police presence, and more like what we have today of community policing, which is the concept anyway that we have today. There was no concept of that back in the 1960s, and that's what we wanted. But we were militant. Yes, I ran a breakfast program. I fed over 70-something children, poor children, every morning, Monday through Friday. No charge, no nothing. Out of the sale of the newspapers, I took money and gave mothers who were students, gave them money to buy their textbooks with. We bought clothing. We even had a little impromptu daycare program that we did for the community. So our whole thing was community oriented.
Yeah.
But we did have an outreach, whereas I don't know if you guys knew about this, but Huey Newton and Bobby Seale led a contingent of Panthers to the state capitol with guns. And they walked into the Capitol Rotunda, and they stood there. Now, the guns weren't loaded, but nobody knew that.
Yeah.
And they stood there to say, we need a voice. Now, there were others, though, like the Weather Underground, which was pretty much a white group, the Black Liberation Army. These were military, paramilitary groups that actually carried out military-type operations. So, but they lumped us all together. As far as they were concerned, we were all one big hodgepodge of revolutionary voices.
Yeah. So the FBI starts investigating.
I just think it's important. Right. And I just think it's important for people to hear that, that it's like you had a lot of different responses to the activities that were going on against Black people. By the government, by the military, by the police, etc. And to think, I think a lot of what we have heard from history is that all of you were either with Martin Luther King Jr. and nonviolent, or you were angry, plotting things to overthrow the government, trying to do violent acts and all this stuff. And I mean, what you're talking about is, hey man. I was writing and I was feeding all these families in a soup kitchen, and even though I know that you've said things like, "Hey, God had to get a hold of your heart," and we can get to that story. But what you were doing in response, most people would say, "Well, that's actually a heroic act of bravery." What you were doing in order to bring light to, I guess, the plight of people who needed help.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. And I'm not going to sit here and whitewash my history, Peter. I was very angry. I carried a gun almost everywhere I went.
Yeah,
but we also we were being murdered, basically. I mean, I remember being face down on a street corner in Berkeley with a police officer's boot on my neck and his 9mm stuck to my head for 45 minutes, telling me how he was going to kill me and no one cared and no one would even know.
Yeah.
And as the police cars pulled up to the side and looked at him and laughed, I said, yeah, I mean, it was a show. It was a circus for them. This is what we were dealing with. Right. And so, I mean, I was angry. And it's not that some people chose to protest and do whatever the way they chose to do it. Some others didn't, but we all had the same purpose. The same purpose was to change the system and to bring justice for people. And listen, we had poets. We had, right now there's a movie about the Shakurs, who, mom was a Panther. He was a rapper. He got killed. Of course, we all know about that.
Tupac.
But Tupac,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And
Tupac. Yeah, Pac.
yeah, and I mean, she was a radical Panther out of New York City. I mean, we all had the same goal, and just some of it overlapped. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, some of it did, right? But our main goal was to lift up the Black community. That's what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We wanted to show people that you're not forgotten, that we can organize, that we can do better, that we can pull together and be for one another and have a better life together. And that's pretty much what we were striving for. And I don't want to get too much. I mean, I know it's interesting. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to bring God into the conversation.
Yeah.
If we can do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because at that time, did it seem like the church, you didn't have a grid for the church being able to do some of those things, or they weren't doing enough?
So, some of them were. Now, there was a African Episcopalian church. The pastor's real famous. Can't remember his name now.
Out of Chicago?
No, in San Francisco.
Oh.
And he did a lot. He had he housed people, he fed people, he did a lot.
Right.
So there were some churches that were very active. There was a church in Oakland, Black church in Oakland, that did a lot. But for the most part, for example, the headquarters I set up for my unit before I moved into the Berkeley chapter unit was a little church and on Grove Street, and they gave us permission to be in there. But then all of a sudden, because we were starting to get pressure from the police, they kicked us out. And
interesting.
And when we said, "Well, we can't leave. We got too much going on here. We got all," and then the police raided us and came in and just drug everybody out, and this was the church. We were hoping they'd protect us, but they basically just turned their backs on us and said, "No, we're done with you." And so, yes, it was a mixed bag.
Wow.
David, it was a mixed bag.
Wow. Yeah.
There were good churches that supported us, and there were others that were afraid of shaking the status quo.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that part of it yet, because, but your encounter with Christ in the real happened once you were in the San Francisco County Jail.
Yeah, before I got released over to Santa Rita in the East Bay. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, yeah, it just amazes me that you basically, what you're experiencing and what you're describing is, I'm sure it felt like everyone except your fellow, Black Panthers had turned their back on you. The church had turned their back on you. All that. And so just that setup where I can't imagine someone not being angry. I'm not saying that, acting out of that anger is right or anything like that, but I'm just saying the hurt that, was caused by that. What a miraculous thing. I mean, I'm just so excited to hear, how did God break through all of that stuff in order to change, your heart? Because your heart is not one. I have never heard a word from you that's vengeful against the church, and someone could easily be that way, having experienced what you've experienced. I've never heard you, going after the people who've hurt you in the past. What did God do? How did He show up to you?
Well, yeah, we did have allies, guys. I mean, we had people in the media in Hollywood. We had other foreign dignitaries that would send us messages and notes and say, "Hey, we're for you," and so forth. The people, why am I blanking on his name now? The South African hero,
Nelson Mandela.
Mandela was with us in solidarity. We had a lot of people that were saying, "Hey, we're with you." I've had South Africans come up to me especially Bethel, when they found out my background and shake my hand and say, "Thank you, we're free now because of what you guys did." So we had allies around the world. This was an international movement. This wasn't just so. Yeah, we were fighting a battle there, but we had allies around the world. So I was raised in the church. Okay, so I didn't have anything against the church, but I did leave the church when I was a young teenager because I just didn't feel like I was seeing what was being preached. I was being preached one thing, and I lived there, guys. I mean, I was president of everything a kid could be president of. You name it, from the Sunday school. I was the most decorated Boy Scout in history there. I mean, you name it, man. And I just wasn't seeing it. It's like, okay, I'm not seeing it here. Let me go out in the street and see if I can find it. And so I did, and I got pretty wild and pretty crazy, and got into like lightweight drugs and marijuana and that sort of thing, and was pretty wild, and almost flunked school. Almost, I barely got out of school. I think because I was an athlete, I barely got out of school, and went to junior college and just dug in and got straight A's, which then got me into a college and so forth and so forth. And then in Nebraska, I met my first Black Panther. And it's like, wow, I was blown away. They come up from Denver, and we started a Black Student Union there. And they come up from Denver to speak. And I was absolutely blown away. Their discipline, their courage, their focus, their professionalism. I mean, these folks were all about business. And they were nice and they were cordial, but at the same time, you could tell there was a steely focus in their eyes, man. And I like, okay, if I'm going to do anything, it's going to be with them. It took me a couple of years, but that's finally when I moved to Berkeley. I was still in school. I was in the JC there. I went to UC Berkeley for a while, but just always kept.
This is a great episode. We're going to keep this going on to next week. So come back next week and listen to the conclusion of Jim Evans' story. Thank you very much for joining us on the Nevcast.
That's it for the Nevcast this time. Join us next week when we talk justice, business, and art in pursuit of Jesus. We will see you soon.